this. So welcome to the Industrial Hemp Workshop. I appreciate you being here on day 3. We have 2 excellent speakers we're looking forward to hearing from. Justin Keay is an MU Extension specialist in horticulture. Justin has been on the front lines for the industrial hemp subject matter. And Justin is going to, I'm going to mute all right now, sorry. And I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself, Justin. Justin is going to talk about CBD and agronomics. And Justin is a Lincoln University graduate. He has been involved in many different methods, forms of food production and food marketing. And we are grateful to have you here, Justin. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask everyone to also turn your video off. It will help with the bandwidth. And with that, Justin, you have got control. I'm going to let you go ahead and take control.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. As Patricia said, I'm a field specialist in horticulture. I cover St. Louis City County and St. Charles County. And we actually have a fair amount of folks growing hemp in this region. So we put on a hemp workshop last fall, fall of 2019 in anticipation for the first growing season in Missouri. So I'm going to talk today about CBD hemp production. Definitely, I would say the category of hemp production, whether CBD, fiber, or grain, CBD has generated the most interest over the past couple years. So I'm going to go over that today, and I'm going to touch on some hemp insects and a little bit of hemp entomology. I'm going to try to be cognizant of the time because I know everybody wants to hear about hemp economics and hemp budgets. So make sure to leave time for Dr. Massey for his presentation. So I might move a little quick through some of this stuff, but you guys will have the slides and the video, so don't worry about writing anything down. In this presentation, I did pull some concepts and some graphics from a CBD hemp production presentation from University of Wisconsin. So what is CBD hemp? It's the type of hemp that's grown for floral biomass. So when you hear about biomass and biomass extraction, that's all related to CBD hemp production. It's bred to produce a low percentage of THC so that it can be legally produced under different state program hemp laws, and a high percentage of CBD. So these are bushy plants. They look a lot like marijuana plants. They're bred for branching. They're bred for the floral development, the buds, if you will, as they might be referred to. It was first developed in Colorado. You might remember hearing stories about Charlotte's Web. That's an image in the top right of this young lady who was first treated with CBD and it proved to be effective for treating seizure disorders. And since the FDA has authorized one drug that contains CBD. So this type of hemp was developed by crossbreeding some fiber varieties, industrial hemp varieties with marijuana to kind of get the best of both worlds. So you get the low THC, but the high CBD percentage. And we talk a lot about CBD, but I think it's important to think about this a little bit more broadly in terms of cannabinoid farming, because CBD is just one of the cannabinoids that people are growing hemp for now. It seems like every year there's a new cannabinoid that people are breeding for and extracting. So CBG and CBN are 2 of the other cannabinoids that are being sold in retail products. And there are varieties that are being marketed to produce high levels of these 2 cannabinoids. So as I said earlier, the FDA has approved one drug based off of CBD, that's Epidiolex. And FDA has been working to figure out ways to regulate hemp-derived CBD products. So CBD is produced very specifically at high levels in the trichomes of the female flowers. So if you look in this bottom right-hand picture, these small translucent structures are where all of those cannabinoids are concentrated. The trichomes also produce what's called terpenes, which are olfactory compounds. And there are some extractors that are extracting terpenes for various uses and selling those terpenes. So when we're thinking about hemp production, we need to think about site selection. Soil testing is critical to growing and establishing any crop. Fortunately, you know, the pH guidelines of 6 to 6.5 fall in line with a lot of other crop production. And I'll just take a step back for a second and say, when we're talking about hemp production, the amount of research out there is very limited, and it only goes back a couple years. When we think about things like corn production, I mean, we have over 100 years of research from the land-grant universities. So anybody that tells you exactly how to grow, this is the only way you can grow it, you know, just take it with a grain of salt, because this is emerging science. In terms of nitrogen fertility, most folks are going off of recommendations from hemp grain, and the hemp grain recommendations are 100 to 140 pounds per acre of nitrogen. Phosphorus and potassium levels are based off of soil test results and can vary from 20 to 80 pounds per acre of phosphorus and 15 to 105 pounds per acre of potassium. There has been some concern that excess nitrogen could increase THC content. However, there was one trial in North Carolina. They pushed all the way up to 300 pounds per acre of nitrogen without an increase in THC content. This is a really kind of hot topic. I think a lot of folks are thinking that THC bump in hot crops has a lot more to do with genetics and stress response than it necessarily does relate to nitrogen. Hemp hates wet soils, so you need to have well-drained soils to grow hemp. It's not going to thrive in a site where there's standing water. You want to avoid extremely compacted ground. If you're planting hemp into an area that previously was pasture and sod, there are concerns with wireworms. Some of the other things you might want to think about in terms of site selection is signage. That picture I had on the first slide said, this is not marijuana, this is hemp. There have been reports of hemp crops being stolen, both from individuals and from university research plots. People either think they're marijuana or they think they can steal it and sell it as marijuana. So just keep that in mind. I think it's best practice to talk to your neighbors so they know what you're doing. You don't want your neighbors to assume you're growing marijuana, call law enforcement or anything like that. And there's also always the concern with any crop that's not herbicide resistant. There's concerns with herbicide drift. So dicamba in particular, you need to consider what surrounds that site and how any herbicide drift could impact your crops. It is a crop that needs irrigation, so you want to make sure you're in a site that can be irrigated. This little chart down at the bottom just shows recommended phosphorus and potassium levels based on soil tests for hemp production. Hemp seems to do a pretty good job at accumulating heavy metals, and some buyers and extractors are beginning to test the floral biomass for these heavy metals. So you might want to consider a heavy metal test as you're selecting your site. Generally more of a concern in urban areas, but lead and other heavy metals can be found in other sites. There are considerations with crop rotation. So there have been reports of white mold in hemp crops following soybeans. And you think of fungal diseases, we want to make sure we have that crop spaced appropriately apart to increase airflow and reduce density. There's a lot of cultivars out there, a ton of hemp cultivars. A lot of them have been developed in the West. So Colorado, Oregon, and Washington have been doing this for quite some time. I think we just always need to keep in mind our growing conditions are extremely different. we have a lot more rain and we have a lot more humidity. So when we get a rain, it doesn't dry off the crop very quick. In July, Missouri averages about 86% relative humidity. And if you've ever been to Colorado in the summertime, you know it's really low humidity. Some of the fungal pathogens thrive on that high humidity and that high nighttime temperature. So we do deal with more fungal pathogens in Missouri. In terms of weather and climate, that's also been some considerations in influencing THC production and hot crops, if you will. There was a study in North Carolina that grew hemp both at sea level and at a high kind of mountain elevation in North Carolina. I think it was about 4,000 or 5,000 feet. They did see an elevation in THC between those two varieties grown at different elevations. So that's folks are really still trying to hone in on what really influences a hot crop. There are research trials. Cornell is doing a lot of research on disease resistance. So just keep in mind that there is information out there that can help guide you in cultivar selection. There's also information, for instance, Kentucky has an approved varieties list. And this is basically based off of a number of years of data when they've done sampling at the state level. If they have a certain variety that tested hot a certain number of times, it then goes on this prohibited variety. To my knowledge, Missouri doesn't have this type of situation with prohibited varieties, but information like this can also prove helpful when you're searching out cultivars. In terms of planting stock, there's a number of different options. Feminized seed, when we think about hemp crops for CBD, we want to grow female plants. We don't want these plants to be seeded. So feminized seed is one way to go. It's very expensive comparatively to other agronomic crops. Non-feminized seed is also available. It's much cheaper, but you really have to do some work to scout those fields and get those male plants out of there before they pollinate the female plants. Transplants from seed, they're generally more hardy and have a better root structure than a clone. A clone is a cut plant. It's a cutting taken from a plant that's rooted. It has a different root structure. So transplants are generally a little bit more hardy. Seeds are generally started in the greenhouse and then transplanted in the field like a lot of our vegetable crops. There have been some work with direct seeding, but that seed cost is very expensive. So that's you could potentially lose a lot of plants before they're able to establish to pests and other things. The plants are generally started in a way very similar to vegetable crops. A common practice is using these 144 trays. You do want to be conscious though, plants get root bound really quick in these flats. So you really need to time your seeding and your planting appropriately, because if you have plants that are sitting in these types of flats for more than a couple weeks, you can have really root bound plants, and that's going to impact establishment and really slow it down. Clones are another option. They're extremely expensive. Like I said, it's basically a cutting taken from what we call a mother plant, a female plant. They are guaranteed to be female, but there's a lot of snake oil in the hemp market. There's a lot of money being invested. So there's people there taking advantage of it. Folks that are selling things that are not what they're supposed to be. There's also tissue culture clones. That would be even more expensive option, but they are disease-free and guaranteed to be genetically female. As I said, these clones, when they're planting it in the field, they don't have as good of a taproot. And you're looking about 30 days from taking that cutting from that female plant, rooting it, and then getting it into the field. And I will say there is a concern, and I saw this year, of folks purchasing clones that are infected or infested with cannabis russet mites. So, make sure you're working with a clone supplier that does due diligence in that. Make sure you scout those clones when you get them. You can also grow your own clones. If you have a situation where you have controlled lighting, you can hold a female plant permanently in the vegetative cycle and then take these clone cuttings from that plant. It's a pretty simple process. You're basically cutting the plant, dipping it in rooting hormone, and then putting it into cocoa coir, rock wool, providing it water until those roots set. You do want to harden off your seedlings. So whenever you're taking something from a greenhouse environment, a very controlled climate, and taking it to the field, it's good to kind of stage them. So we want to use potentially a structure like a shade house, or at least kind of put them in an area where they get some shade during the day to allow them to acclimate to the weather outside. In terms of transplanting these hemp plants, water wheel transplanter is the most common when you're using plasticulture. And this is a big one. They make single row ones for smaller horsepower tractors. And then there's these pull type planters, which are more appropriate for bare soil. On the small scale, plenty of folks do this by hand, just like they do with vegetable production. As I said earlier, research data is extremely limited. Optimum protocols, universities are trying to develop this based off of research. It's a work in progress, and it's going to take a lot more data before we can formally say, this is the optimal way to grow it for your area, for your region. And much of the practices with CBD hemp production are kind of extrapolated from outdoor marijuana field production in US states where it's legal. So in some ways this has been adopted, and then we're trying to study it in terms of how to optimize it. In terms of transplanting, you're looking at May to June for transplanting. And from research, it shows that this planting date, the exact planting date isn't super critical. The yields tend to be pretty similar across that planting window. You want to start your seeds or get your cuttings going about 4 to 5 weeks prior to the transplant date. It is a day length sensitive crop. As the days begin to get shorter, this crop is going to want to show its sex and it's going to want to flower. There are, however, auto flower varieties, just like a lot of other crops, an 85-day crop, at this set date, it's going to flower. Those are newer varieties. They're more expensive, but as the years roll by, more of these genetics are going to become available. So this is just a little graph. These are different planting dates on the left, from the 14th of June to the 27th of June. And then if we look at the dry flower yield, there's a little bit of difference, but not statistically. So that planting window can be a little bit flexible in terms of dates. In terms of what does it look like in the field? Most folks are going on a 6x6 or a 5x6 spacing. So 6 feet between the plants, 6 feet between the rows. And that'll give you a population between 1,200 and 1,450 plants per acre. As you're laying out your field, I think getting into this kind of crop is probably the easiest for folks that have some background in vegetable production, because there's so much similarity. But you do need to think about what equipment are you going to have on hand. If you have bare soil, what equipment are you going to use to cultivate between the plants or in the alleys? Are you going to have room for mechanical cultivation between those rows? Are you going to be out there with a hoe crew knocking down weeds? There's also the option to use grassed or cover cropped alleys, but you need to think about, can you get a mower between those? This picture on the far right shows grassed alleyways. That's a good way to keep the dust down and limit erosion using cover crops. In terms of spacing, so if we look at the left here, we have 1 by 1 foot spacing all the way up to 5 by 5 foot spacing. The first yellow bar here shows that the dry matter flower yield per plant in the 5 by 5 spacing is much more. However, when we zoom out to the per acre basis in this 1 by 1 spacing, we actually get a substantial amount more, 4,600 pounds per acre versus 2,340 pounds per acre. So most people aren't growing it at this 1 by 1 spacing. I think that, as this crop gets more mechanized over time and folks are looking at how can they maximize yield for floral biomass for extraction, How can we use, bigger equipment to handle this? There might be folks that are growing it in a way that doesn't look at all like this 5x5 space, and they have a lot more dense plants. Now that raises the concern of density and humidity and getting more fungal diseases. But it's interesting to note that you actually can get more pounds per acre with smaller plant spacing. That also ties into harvesting. Having more plants to handle, remove flower from is going to take a lot more labor. So don't go by this one by one. It's just something to consider here. So in terms of weed control, like any other crop, that first 30 days is really critical. If the weeds get out of hand during that first 30 days, you're going to be playing catch up for the rest of the season. There's plenty of mechanical weeding options. There's, folks that are doing this with hand weeding. There's not any herbicides registered in hemp in Missouri. So plasticulture, using that plastic to control weeds is another option that folks are going with. Irrigation is really critical. You want to avoid overhead irrigation. So when we have overhead irrigation and high humidity, we create a situation where the duration of leaf wetness is long enough where these fungi can reproduce and establish. So definitely avoid overhead irrigation or sprinklers. Drip lines are the most commonly used. Those can be used both for bare soil and plasticulture. So as I said, this is a day length sensitive crop and we only want female plants. So one of the things, even if you buy feminized seed, you do still need to what they call scout the field and rogue the males. So when the days begin getting shorter later in the summer, we really need to keep an eye out for these flowers setting. So if we look on the left, we have what we call a female pre-flower, and then on the right, a male pre-flower. So those are before the flowers are fully formed. You can begin scouting, and when you first start seeing these male pre-flowers, you need to get out there and remove them from the field, because one male plant could spoil acres and acres of female hemp plants. At maturity, this is what the female and male flowers look like. And that brings the question, how do we know when to harvest this crop? Well, what most folks are doing is a combination of monitoring the color of the trichome, that's that translucent structure I mentioned earlier, as well as testing, THC testing. So if you have a lot invested in the field, you want to make sure you're harvesting it at the appropriate time, both to maximize the percentage of CBD, as well as mitigate the risk of an elevated THC content that could cause you to legally have to destroy that crop. North Carolina State has some recommendations for this. They suggest when 20 to 30% of the trichomes have turned amber, and if you see this picture on the far right, you can see some of those trichomes are turning from translucent to a more amber color. So some folks are testing when you get towards that end of the harvest cycle, or testing on a weekly basis to monitor that. Just talking to growers around the state, folks from the Kansas City area were telling me that they were harvesting about 9/23 in the St. Louis area a little bit later, but just to give you a rough idea there. Harvesting the crop. So this is a labor intensive production system. And I've seen this happen where folks plan a lot and they don't plan for weed control, harvest, and all the other pest management activities. A lot of folks are hand harvesting these with machetes and just tossing the whole plants into a wagon to take them back to get dried. There is mechanized harvest equipment available. And I will note that there are other production systems where folks are actually cutting this like forage and attempting to wet bale this stuff. That's not a lot of people are doing that. A lot of it's still in the research stage. But folks, if you're taking this product and you really just want to extract these cannabinoids, maybe it can be mechanized in a way to where it doesn't require that hand labor. So I will note here there are kind of two directions that people take with this crop. The most common is biomass for extraction for CBD into CBD products. The other category, which is about 10% of the CBD market, is what they call smokable hemp flower. So I worked with a couple growers that are kind of going this direction. It's basically harvesting hemp and processing it in a way similar to how marijuana might be processed in states where it's legal. In that circumstance, how the plant looks after harvest really matters, and how much care and time is taken with it, which is different than if you're taking it to extraction, because you're just wanting to pull this one compound out of it. And then I've talked to producers in Illinois. They're actually feeding whole plants through a silage chopper and then drying it in the silage wagon. So, just to say, there's a lot of different ways people are doing this. Both harvest and post-harvest processing take a lot of labor. It's not just cutting the plants. It's what are you going to do with those plants after they're cut? This is really, really time critical, both for the reason of THC levels, weather. You start getting into the end of the fall, you get, heavy rains. It stays cool and wet. You don't want to be harvesting a crop just after a heavy rain. Also crop maturity, and then also considering, post-harvest pathogens. So if you harvest a crop that's already wet, the likelihood that you're going to get mold after the harvest is really high. You want to make sure you have your labor lined up and taken care of well in advance. In terms of mechanization, the picture on the left is a whole plant harvester. And there's so much hemp machinery being developed right now. That's a whole plant harvester on the left. The picture on the right, this is from a farmer in Illinois where, like I said, he was chopping it, putting it in the silage wagon and air drying it. But I think, every year there's going to be new ways to do this and new pieces of equipment. This stuff is expensive, but so is labor. So in post-harvest, there's definitely mold concerns. You want to get this crop hanging to dry immediately after harvest. You need a really well ventilated building. You want to add fans for air circulation to help move that humidity out as the crop dries. Drying temperatures should be held between 60 to 70 degrees. The ideal humidity for drying, we don't really know yet. Some folks, if it's too low, the plant can dry really, really quickly. That can cause some issues if you're going to smokable flower. So that's still kind of being honed in. Target percentage of moisture for long-term storage is recommended 6 to 14%. I think it's probably a good idea to stay on the low end of that. So this is another concern. Where do you hang these plants? How much space do I need to hang them? We don't really have any good data on this. I have heard some anecdotal reports of folks being able to dry an acre worth of plants in an 800 square foot space. It was had an area where they could hang both from the ceiling and at a lower level. So they had 2 levels there. But definitely plan for that stuff, because if you invest a lot of money and you get to the harvest and post-harvest and you don't have anywhere to dry it, you're gonna waste a lot of money. The big plants can hold a lot of humidity in the center. So some folks are actually breaking down the plants into smaller branches to avoid mold development. There is some equipment out there that's been developed for removing the flowers from the stalks, because most processors are not necessarily going to be interested in whole plants, because there's a lot of unusable material, stalks and branches. They don't contain high levels of CBD. So, folks do this just like everything else in hemp production. I think there's 100 ways to skin a cat. There's folks that are doing this by hand. The picture on the left there shows what's called a bucking machine, where they're feeding the stalk in there and it actually strips the flowers off. That's a dry bucking machine. There's also wet bucking machines. The picture on the right, they've removed those flowers from the stalk when they're wet, and then they're using what's called a drying kiln. So a lot of different ways folks are doing this. And I think if you're working with a processor, if you're selling for extraction, you want to check with your processor and see what they expect from the crop that you're going to be delivered. Because you don't want to go through all this work of processing, harvest, hang, dry, get to the processor, and they say, I'm not going to accept this load because there's too much stalks or too much branches in the load. So that's also important just for whatever restrictions. I mentioned heavy metals earlier. There are some processors that are putting restrictions on pesticides. So even though you might be legally allowed to use that pesticide, they might not allow it for the products that they're making. So it's important that you have that conversation with the processor early to know which direction you need to be headed. And I've included a lot of links in this PowerPoint. This one is just from a hemp farm that has done a good job of taking pictures and showing how they handle things. Like I said, I'm not saying any one way is the best way to do it. It's going to depend on the processor. It's going to depend on what's going to work for you. So I've included some links here. We have a fair amount of resources on our industrial hemp program page. Some other states that I like to keep an eye on because they're doing a fair amount of work in this sphere. University of Wisconsin has pretty good resources on CBD, fiber, and grain. They're further north than us, so keep in mind when you're looking at planting dates, they're going to be a little bit different. They have also produced some pretty good hour and a half long YouTube videos that kind of expand this production discussion for CBD as well as fiber and grain. University of Kentucky has been doing this for a number of years as well. They have some pretty good information out there. And University of Tennessee has some good information out there as well. All these universities are such at the infancy of this research that at this point, sometimes it's good to look at multiple sources because you might have one university working a lot on insects, one working a lot on diseases. I think as the years go by, each state is going to have a lot more information related to hemp, but we're just really at the infancy of this thing, especially in Missouri. We had our first production season in 2020. So I'm going to touch a little bit here on entomology, a little bit on insects. I got these slides with permission from Katie Britt. She's an entomologist at Virginia Tech. She came and spoke to a bunch of MU faculty a couple years ago when all this hemp stuff kind of started showing up on the horizons. And there's a link there for an IPM guide, and I'll make sure to drop that in the chat later. These slides won't be included in your presentation that you're emailed, but that integrated pest management guide has pretty much all this stuff in it. So just like anything else with hemp, well, actually, let me make note here. We did develop a fact sheet this year for industrial hemp pesticides in Missouri. It was really hard to figure out what was going on with pesticides. EPA had an approved list, and then MDA has most of those registered in the state of Missouri. But it was hard to sort through all the information. So we made this fact sheet. It's got fungicides, insecticides, bactericides, and all of these products have clickable hyperlinks so you can pull up the label, see what they're labeled for. I'll just say there's a very limited number of pesticides that are registered on hemp. This is a product that's being consumed in a different way than a lot of our other agronomic crops. We're extracting, we're concentrating, which has the potential to concentrate some of those pesticide compounds. Most of the stuff on this list is biologically based. Some of it is organic approved, but we don't have the same slew of products that we can rely on in any of our other crops. I think this list will be expanded over time, but things like integrated pest management and planning ahead are even more critical for hemp, because if you get into an insect problem and you have to take a reactive approach and what pesticide do I use for this, it's going to be challenging to manage versus if you kind of planned ahead for what the pests were, what you need to anticipate to scout and keep an eye out for in the field. It's much easier to handle a pest outbreak when it's small as opposed to when it's full blown. And this is that IPM, Integrated Pest Management of Hemp in Virginia. And there's a fair amount of good information from Colorado State, but our pests are much more similar to Virginia. And they've done a lot of good work over the past number of years in this. So what they've seen in Virginia, there's definitely a difference in indoor and outdoor pests, and that goes with any crop. There's different pest concerns because we're harvesting different parts for fiber, grain, and CBD. There's many insects, pests, and otherwise present in the fields. I think this goes along with the snake oil salesman, but people saying, well, hemp doesn't have any insect pests. It doesn't have any diseases. Well, that's not true. And just because you plant it in year 1 and you don't see some of these pests doesn't mean that in year 4 or 5, they will become just as much of a problem as some of the common pests in our row crops and vegetable crops. Just like everything else in hemp, we're really at the infancy of this research. And we don't know a lot about how much yield is lost to insect damage, how defoliation actually affects CBD yield or floral biomass yield. And also we don't have insect thresholds, and all of our agronomic crops and vegetable crops, we can pretty much tell you when you have this many insects per plant or this many insects per net sweep, you need to react and apply a pesticide. We just don't have that information for hemp. So some of our sucking pests, and these can be present. These are present in Missouri as well as in Virginia. This cannabis aphid is kind of interesting because this cannabis aphid has been in the environment surviving on wild hemp for a long time. We didn't really know a lot about it, and we hadn't really seen it until people started producing hemp, but it is out there. Stink bugs seem to do some feeding. But just because they're in the field doesn't mean they're really affecting yield. So it appears that they might not actually be that damaging of a pest in the hemp crop. This is the cannabis aphid. It is a specialist. Like I said, it survived in the environment on those wild hemp crops. And there's probably other plants in the plant family that it feeds on, but it is an emerging pest. And you'll see these mummies. When they go through metamorphosis, they'll leave behind a shell. They leave some very characteristic signs of infestation. So this brown, sooty stuff, as well as their shells or their mummies, are a clear indicator of aphid presence. We have a number of chewing pests, cucumber beetle, grasshopper, the ever-nemesing Japanese beetle. And we also have, some common agronomic pests that are becoming an issue in our hemp crops, like corn earworm and some other armyworms. You can also get what's called secondary damage. So corn earworm has shown to really like to feed on the bud or the flowers on the plant. And that feeding injury can open you up to gray mold, or more commonly referred to as bud rot. You can find the adults, but you can also find the frass. It's a little bit harder to see on black plastic, but on white plastic, you can see the poop. If you've ever grown tomatoes and had tomato hornworm, you'll probably have seen the poop on the plants as well. European corn borer definitely has caused some issues across the Midwest. Mites are probably, they're one of the top 3. If you don't know what you're looking for, it just looks like a stunted plant. It looks like a plant that maybe has some root damage. Maybe you're not sure. When the plant is at this point, you need to cut it and get rid of it. Cut it and put it in a bag and burn it. And likely at this point, these neighboring plants also have mites on them as well. You might think this is herbicide damage. Mite damage can really mimic damage from herbicides like dicamba. And I did see this at a lot of fields in my area this summertime. So just keep that in mind. It might look, you might think it's drought stress, herbicide. You're really going to need a microscope to see those mites, but this is most definitely mite damage. It could look like disease, but this is an advanced stage of mite damage. You do need magnification to see these, and you can utilize clinics. We have a disease clinic, plant disease clinic at MU. We're currently without a director, so I helped some folks send some samples to Illinois. So if you don't have good magnification, you might want to send a sample off to find out what pests you have, so you know what you might need to apply for control. There's other mites too, besides that hemp russet mite. Two-spotted spider mites have been found present in hemp fields. They have a little bit different damage. The damage appears a little bit differently on the hemp crop. I talked about planting, and this is not just for hemp, but anytime you go from an area that's been in sod or pasture, you're always going to probably encounter wireworms. You're likely to encounter wireworms. So like if you go from sod to potatoes, this is always a big problem. So if you're doing that, going from a pasture area, you want to scout for these wireworms to know what's there, because they have caused some damage by root feeding on the hemp crop. The three most damaging, this is from Virginia, but likely to be a similar pest complex in Missouri. Make sure if you're purchasing cuttings to scout for that cannabis russet mite. That one has not been shown to be present everywhere like the aphid has. Excuse me, the aphid is found to be present through a lot of the Midwest. That russet mite we're finding comes in on plants. And once you get it there, it's likely that you're not going to eliminate it from the environment. So just keep that in mind. Work with reputable suppliers and make sure to scout your plants. Just also keep in mind that just because an insect is present doesn't mean it's a pest. These are all beneficial insect predators that are found in the hemp crop. So whether it's lady beetles, and they can look different on these top three pictures at different stages. This lacewing larvae in the middle is a voracious predator of things like aphids. So just because you see an insect doesn't mean you need to spray. Make sure you identify, know what your target insect is, and then go back to that pesticide fact sheet and start doing a little bit of digging, looking up labels and finding out what's labeled for that product. So I think that is all I got. I know I threw a lot at you there, so let me know if you have any questions, and you will get these slides as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was actually very, very informative. Now, I do have a few questions that are in the chat for you, Justin. One of them is, and says, it's from Connor Choice. He wants to know what's currently being done with discarded stalks and biomass, if anything.
So that's a good question. I believe, I don't know, Alan, are you on the line? I'm not curious, or I'm not sure if MDA has guidelines on that, if you have to destroy that leftover material or if it could perhaps be just composted.
Either Alan or Aaron are both on the call. If
yeah,
maybe
we might have to, sorry, we might have to get
question.
back to that one. Yeah.
Right.
I know as of now, it's not approved for feeding of livestock or anything like that. I think there's a lot of interest in that. And maybe we'll get there at some point. I think they're either have to be destroyed or composted, and maybe we can get a clarification from that from Alan or Aaron later in the hour.
Yeah, I think at this point it's not legal for livestock feeding that's going to resale into a retail market. I would say that would be, although we did hear yesterday that there are some folks who are doing research on animal feed, but as you and I both know, that has to go through the Food and Drug Administration eventually, and that's going to be an issue. And Connor comments that they're interested in processing it for fiber. So, you know,
I
it
gotcha.
would,
Yeah.
I think we kind of, maybe you and I have had this conversation that the stalks from a CBD plant that was grown just for CBD are going to be bigger and heavier than what fiber processors might want to see. And
Yeah, I think I think that's correct, Patricia. I mean, the plants that are bred for different things produce different products, right? So the quality of the fiber in the CBD plant is probably not the same, and also what the processor can handle. You know, they're going to want plants that fall within a certain range so that it works with their equipment. So, you know, there might be some folks working on that. I don't know that it would be, you know, hugely profitable, and might not be what a processor wants, but yeah, I think there's folks that are looking at that. I don't think there's anybody that's, you know, really done it and made it profitable yet, because it might not fall within what the processor needs.
And Aaron has commented, Aaron from Missouri Department of Agriculture Hemp Program, once it is a publicly marketable product, which harvested and THC is less than 0.3%, the program does not regulate it, which we of course heard about on Monday. But there might be other agencies such as Food and Drug, Department of Health and Senior Services. And it sounds to me like the Hempire, a group from Connor, would be interested in contacting folks who are first harvesting the CBD and then have the fiber left over. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's a good offer and a good resource to share. When we get done with this program, I will likely try to put a newsletter together that each of us as presenters can maybe edit and put some comments on and share that with the folks who are participating now. So I think
and I would just say, Connor, like if you're interested in that, you might want to connect with some of the trade groups. I've worked with some folks from Missouri Hemp Trade Association. There's a couple of the other ones out there. So like, if you're interested in exploring that as an enterprise, you know, I would connect with those folks. It might be a good way to connect with other growers you might be able to source biomass from.
I always love the term wireworms because I always call it wireworms. It's the berm. And I'm kind of curious at how much damage they're doing in current hemp crops. Of course, it'd be anecdotal right now, but Dr. Babu also mentioned the wireworms as an issue. And Connor says he's a member of Show Me Hemp, and they've been discussing it extensively. And I also know that Show Me Hemp is going to have a statewide meeting. I believe the date is March 1st. And that's part of the information that I'll share with when we put a little informational summary letter together. So that'll be good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you, I'm not sure what you're planning on doing with them, but we do have Tiger Fiber in Missouri has established. So if you're looking to sell them to somebody and see if that's even an option, you might want to connect with those guys as well.
And they're tomorrow's speaker. And like I said, Connor's business is called Hempire, and they're also a fiber processor. So that'll be good. And by the way, I want to share that I did go to a state trade meeting last year. And you may think that it doesn't have value necessarily because of the speakers on the agenda, but let me tell you, networking with people face to face and having these private conversations with the people who are participating and in these groups are extremely valuable. You can't discount that meeting face to face. I mean, I know we like to meet face to face here virtually, but let me tell you, nothing takes the place of you and I in the same room together. Anyway, Aaron asks, when do you recommend producers to begin preliminary testing, and how often?
So, you know, there's not really a great I guess, well-defined best practice. I think, based off of the harvest dates that I've seen, late September, early October, I would think you'd probably want to start sometime in earlier mid-September. I think, when those trichomes begin maturing, that's a good time to do it. In terms of how often, there's not really a defined best practice for that, but I think from what I've seen, the more money people have invested and potential to lose, people are testing more often. But yeah, that's.
And the other thing we heard from David Middleton yesterday, and I thought these were both really valuable points because David's a certified sampler. And he says one recommendation that he made, which makes sense to me, is to have your lots, if you're going to produce, have smaller lots, 1 acre or less. That way, if you get a hot sample, you haven't really lost your whole crop if you've designated that lot as 5 acres or more, or 3 acres or anything like that. And he does recommend at least one early sample. And I personally, I think the cost would be well worth it because you really can't afford to have it go hot, and lose that whole crop the way the current administration is regulating industrial hemp in the state of Missouri. So, any other questions? You answered the question I wrote down about how do you see the mites, and you said the 20X. I don't know if my loop is a 20X or not. It might be, but I'm wondering if I thought the russet mite was really interesting. I think we're going to need to talk more about that.
Yeah, and it's, I think scouting both clones, if you're buying clones, as well as just continuously scouting the field, because it's a lot easier to take one plant that has a small infestation, get it out of the field, be done with it. Because once you have a full-blown infestation like that, it's pretty tough to deal with. And even though there's maybe 20, 25 or so pesticides on that list, to be honest with you, none of them are supremely effective on russet mite. So, I think there's going to be more pesticides that are labeled, and there'll be more research on what is effective for russet mite. But, right now we don't have answers to all these questions. So scouting is really critical.
Well, that is good to know. If anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Let's just take about 2 minutes to get up and walk around, and we're going to let Ray Massey get his presentation. And I just want to make sure you're still a co-host.
I'm still a co-host.
All right, very good. That's the important thing. Well, let's give it 2 minutes, folks, and then we'll let Ray get started. Okay, I'll let you post any other questions. I thought that was a good work. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Justin.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah.
We kind of learned something today. And I do want to remind everyone that we have on that constant contact email I'm sending out every day, I'm adding more data. The MU Extension Industrial Hemp Resource page is a clickable link on the on that document. Ray, you might want to switch to presenter view. You might want to switch views on yours.
So actually, right now you should see just a screen. At least that's what I see. Without
you need to go up to display. We're seeing your presenter view. So if you go up to display settings and switch it,
All right.
Up there in the top part. You were okay, but.
Well, I'm probably okay, except I don't know how to manage the thing. So I'll keep working on it.
I wonder if I can get in there and do it. You just go ahead and open it up. And whenever you're ready.
I'm trying again.
Okay.
Meeting controls. Well, actually, I'm lost. So let me
just go on up there. Okay.
Okay, there I go. I found them again.
Perfect. Now it's exactly the way we want it to be.
That's the way you want it to be.
Don't change a thing.
All right. Well,
I'm going to do a quick introduction of Dr. Ray Massey, who is an ag economist with the University of Missouri Extension. Dr. Massey's his economic specialty is risk management, with an emphasis on the impact of production agriculture on the environment. And he is one of his projects that I personally love as an ag business specialist is the ag site assessment. Every time I use it when I meet with a producer, I get to look like a genius. It's wonderful. That's one of the best things. He's got some other sites that he's worked on, useful to usable, that helps farmers incorporate climate information and behavioral economics. And so I'm not going to go into more of your details because we published them already. And with that, Dr. Massey, if you want to go ahead and continue, I'm going to mute myself. And folks, as before, please post your questions in the chat. Thank you.
So thank you. And I am going to encourage you to post your questions in the chat. And yet I'm also going to say that I'm willing to be interrupted if you want to unmute yourself and ask me a question. And the reason is, as Justin has so appropriately pointed out, this is a production process that is in flux. And so what happens for an economist like me is I normally go and I talk to the agronomist and I say, okay, what do you do when you grow corn? And they'll say, well, we either do this prior to planting and this at planting and this after planting and this at harvest. And I just take all of that information and I start to put economic information behind it. Well, now if I go and talk with agronomists at the University of Missouri, I frequently get, we really don't know what to do with hemp. So I'll talk with agronomists at other universities and they all have different ideas. So the reason I bring that up is my budget is based off of a production process. And that if that process is not what you're doing, I'm hoping to show you how to change it. I welcome your conversations to say, what would happen if I did it this way or that way? And that would actually be more fun for me than just going through the slides. But let me go through the slides and kind of chat with you for a little while on what's happening. And the first thing I want to do is show the industrial hemp growth. Let me see, Control, Alt, Shift, and H. There we go. So the industrial hemp growth, this goes through 2017, 18, and 19. The next slide is going to be 2020, I mean. But really, I just wanted you to get the picture here of, we went from maybe 25, 30,000 acres to over 250,000 acres, a tenfold increase in 2 years. Anytime you see that as an economist, you recognize, wow, the supply has just blossomed. As an economist, you say if the supply blossoms, what we're having then is downward pressure on prices. So everybody was excited about the industrial hemp. Then in 2020, we actually noticed over here on the far right, it says there was a 9% decrease in acres from 2019. And so we're looking at 465,000 acres on June 18th. And by the way, I need to make it clear here, just as Justin was showing some slides from other universities, I have borrowed some slides from the University of Kentucky that they used recently, just because they're really good slides. I think this is one of them. It shows the number of acres by state. But the key point here to me is overall in the nation, we actually had fewer acres in 2020 than we had in 2019, which is a little different because in the state of Missouri, we grew it for the first time, and so we had more acres. So if you have a local perspective, you say, yeah, people are growing it if you have a national perspective, we see that there was some contraction. And so the last little bullet point there is 27% increase in grower numbers. So more people are growing it on smaller lots, and overall there's less. So that actually is good from an economic perspective to have less production, because less supply gives an upward pressure on prices. So that's just a little bit of background on supply. Let me go into something real briefly that, again, Justin addressed a little bit, but there's different markets. He focused mainly on CBD. I'm going to be looking at fiber and grain and CBD. And there was a question here earlier about fiber, so hopefully this will be of use to some folks. But when you're looking at a plant here, the stalk is where we normally think about getting our fiber from. And when we look at fiber, we're actually getting two different products. We're getting the fiber and the hurd, and they're making different things out of that. But we're normally looking at a stalk when we're looking for hemp for fiber. And therefore, we want a tall, skinny, lots of stalk, less leaves. If we're looking at CBD for grain, we are wanting to get the seed, which is typically on the top third. And that's going to be used for just a bunch of different things, whether it's the seed itself in a salad type thing or crushed for oil or things of that nature. And then the third one, which got the most interest in the last couple of years, is for CBD. And that would be getting the flowers before they're fertilized, and you never want seed. So those are the three. I'm going to, and each one of them does have a different growing process. And so I have three different budgets that we're going to look at. And actually, this is a busy slide, but what it really says is if you go to extension.missouri.edu, type in the word industrial hemp, you'll find these four budgets that I'm going to address today, and a bunch of other stuff. Again, as Justin mentioned, you'll find the guide on approved pesticides and things of that nature, and market information. So I'm going to address these. Let's go with fiber production first. Fiber production, I usually tell farmers here in Missouri, is similar to hay production. First, you get paid by the ton, which is what's happening with hay. And then you can use traditional haymaking equipment, but there may be some challenges because hemp is tough, and harvesting and baling is just a little bit more challenging or hard on the equipment than baling grass or alfalfa or something of that nature. But your equipment need is the tillage equipment to plant it, the planter or the grain drill, any cultivation equipment to try and keep the weeds down, because as we mentioned earlier, there are no good herbicides labeled for this. And then you'll need a rower, a rake, a baler, and most people are saying go for a large rectangular baler, which is different than what most Missouri forage producers use. So you can use a round baler, but a square baler would probably be more ideal. So what I've done is I've just on this slide here minimized that budget to just some of the bare essentials. And so my budget that I published in November of this year says that you may be able to get 5 tons of hemp for fiber, and you see how it's tall and skinny here, which is a different picture than what Justin was showing. At $130 a ton, you get $650 income per acre. The thing that's going to surprise folks, that if they're comparing this to, say, a corn budget, is the seed is actually more expensive for hemp than it is for corn. You're looking at $175 an acre for the seed. Fertilizer is going to be a little bit less at $58 an acre. Machinery and custom hire is going to be higher, and most of this I priced as custom hire. So how much does custom planting cost? How much is custom fertilizer, custom harvest for cutting and baling, things of that nature. Then you do have a monitoring and testing expense of $26 an acre. And again, that depends on how many acres you actually have in your lot. But I put it down here at $26 an acre. I divided it, I think, among 10 acres. There's some other costs such as interest and things of that nature. And then you've got a land charge of $150 an acre for total cost of 637 or net income of $13 an acre. And that is not actually looking real good right now. I mean, I can make more, or I think I can make more with corn than I can do with hemp for forage. But can I make more with hemp for forage than I can with perhaps a grass hay? That's maybe a little more challenging. So it's not just money that's jumping out and saying, hey, I want to go and do that, but it is positive at this point. I'm going to try and do something here if I can. I'm going to try and bring my hemp budget up onto the screen. So I assume you are seeing the hemp budget. Is that correct, Patricia? Can you see the hemp budget?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So the reason I bring this up is if you don't like anything I've said, all you have to do is come here and say, I think I can get $150 a ton, and it changes it for you, and everything gets done differently for you. So this again is at extension.missouri.edu. Type in industrial hemp, and it will give you a link towards that. So getting back to the PowerPoint presentation though, I'm looking at $13 an acre. What I really want to do, because this is such a new crop, is I want to pay attention to what I call a sensitivity analysis, or what happens if my yield goes up or down, what happens if my market price goes up or down. So you'll see right here in the middle, I have $12.58. That's my 5 tons per acre at $130 per ton. And if I go down to 110, I'm losing money. If I go down to 4 tons per acre, I'm losing money. So this shows that I'm really right on the margin there between losing money and making money, given the assumptions that I have. I need to be better than 5 and get more than 130. So what are some of the things that are bottlenecks or problems here? The decortification equipment and infrastructure is expensive. So, you know, an individual farmer is not going to own it. They're going to need to take it to a processor. And so if they're going to take it to a processor, they need to make sure that they're probably close enough to that processor where they're not spending all their money on transportation. The second point here is contracts are essential. And this is actually a really intriguing question. So in 2019, there were contracts being offered, and most of the stories are with CBD, but there's some stories also with fiber and with seed. But there are contracts offered in 2019, and then the processor that had the contract went bankrupt or had financial difficulties, and then was not able to honor that contract. And so people will say, why do I need a contract if he's not going to be able to honor it, or if he's going to declare bankruptcy? And I have what's called counterparty risk. He can't pay me, now I can't pay my processors and things of that nature. Well, just think about it for a second. If you didn't have a contract, you surely did not have a market for it. And if you did have a contract, you may not have had a market, but there was a chance that you did. So contracts are essential. And to the degree that you want to insure your production via any type of crop insurance, they actually specify you must have a contract. So contracts are essential. And there was a question about what do you do with biomass? Well, with hemp stalks, there really actually is no alternative market. It's not yet able to be used as livestock feed. You can use it for bedding or things of that nature, perhaps, but you just don't have that flexibility that you would with other crops of having another market. So I'm going to move on now and look at what happens with grain production. If I have industrial hemp for grain production, I frequently talk to farmers and say, you know, it's similar to your traditional grain crop production. So your corn production, you're producing a seed. Instead of selling it by bushels, you're going to sell it by pounds. The equipment that you need is very much the same: any tillage, planter, cultivation, combine, grain storage, grain dryer. Maybe you'll need a seed cleaner though, which, you know, a lot of old time farmers had a seed cleaner because they saved back seed, but not very many people have a seed cleaner right now. So they're probably going to have to take it to a seed company, which would clean it for them. Consider that as one of the cost of production. But otherwise, it's very similar to grain production. And if I were to take that budget, which again, I'm going to go back to this, what I'm doing is I'm taking this hemp for grain budget and I'm just summarizing it so that it's shorter. Again, you can change any of these things in gray to make it look like what you want it to look like as far as your price. But my budget says that I'm going to produce 1,000 pounds of grain, and I'm going to be able to sell it for $60 a pound, or 60 cents a pound, excuse me, for a total of $600. My seed is a little bit less expensive at 105. My fertilizer is just a tad more expensive at 61. I have some machinery and custom hire at 169 bucks. Monitoring and testing, again, I have to monitor it and test it for that THC and other things. 26, my other expenses, whether that's interest or some subscriptions I might have or overhead of different sorts. $6 land, 150. My total cost of 517, and I would expect that you'd make 83 bucks an acre here. $83 an acre net income is probably acceptable, except this year corn prices just took a tremendous jump. So people are going to say, wait a minute, maybe next year corn is going to be more profitable, but 83 would have been an acceptable profit for corn the last couple of years. And so this would be very competitive with corn. Again, I say it uses a lot of the same equipment, but again, it is managed differently. So this is not just your corn producer changing what kind of seed he produces or plants in the ground, which there was some New York governor that said, oh, this is going to be easy. You just put a seed in the ground and let it grow. That is not quite what's going to happen here. So the net income's acceptable. When I do this sensitivity analysis again, I just point out that I'm looking here at this $83, which was 1,000 pounds per acre at 60 cents per pound. I don't have quite as much red surrounding my $83, meaning I can maybe get a little less yield of 900 pounds per acre instead of 1,000 and still be in the black, still make money. If I start to lose anything on my price, I'm losing money though. So I want to be as careful as I can in making sure I have a market and that I have production that I think is necessary for this. So what are the bottlenecks here? You are dealing with a food grade product, not number 2 yellow corn. And number 2 yellow corn is, most people can deliver number 2 yellow corn, but I couldn't. I mean, it does require expertise. You need to up the game. And so you're going to be delivering something that's even a higher quality than that. And let's just skip that contract one and go to what's the processor's going to discount if you don't meet the quality standards. You've got minimum seed size that they're going to say. You have to have 9% moisture, which most likely means you're going to harvest it at a higher moisture. And some people are saying harvest about 20% moisture. because of the way that it dries and shatter and things of that nature. So if you harvest it at 20% moisture and you dry it down to 9% moisture, you've got that drying fee associated with it. And drying can affect breaks and quality. So you just need to make sure that you've got that quality. The contracts that I've seen call for 99.5% purity, which is a higher purity than 2% corn. So again, you may have to go to a cleaner, a seed cleaner, to get it down to that or up to that level of purity. And if they detect any yeast, molds, bacteria, things of that nature, they're just going to say, no, we don't need it, because this is, like I said, a food grade quality or product that they're looking for. So the biggest bottleneck is, can you deliver the quality that they're looking for? I've got that thing of get a contract prior to growing. I'm going to repeat that again even later. You want to make sure that you have a market for this, unless you want to spend the time marketing it. This is used for bird seed as well. So let's say that you do have something that doesn't meet their specifications. You probably aren't going to be able to sell it for bird seed if it's full of yeast or mold, but if it's just the minimum seed size is the wrong, where you've got less than 99.5% purity, you may be able to put it into the bird seed market or things of that nature. So there's some opportunities of things to do with it otherwise, but ideally you want a contract so that you know what the price is going to be and what you're expected to do as far as the quality that you're expected to deliver. So going to the third one, industrial hemp CBD market. Again, talking to farmers, I say, well, this is similar to tobacco, which few Missouri farmers have grown, or horticulture, which perhaps a few more have grown, but they're still not used to horticulture. And so it's a very different system. And I've got that water wheel here for a picture as far as planting. So you may need a transplanter. You're going to need some kind of a storage and drying shed, which again, Justin said, make sure you know what you're going to do after you harvest it before you plant it, because once you get the plant, it's again going to need care. So the income is based on a percent of CBD content per pound of biomass. And so when we start looking at that, we're saying there's going to have to be a lot of trust between the two parties in a contract because of the testing that goes on. Meaning he comes back and says, hey, you only got 9% CBD per pound. And you say, well, I'm pretty sure I got 10%. Those kind of things are going to need to be thought through ahead of time because it's going to make a huge difference in how you get paid or how much you get paid. And the other thing, again, which Justin brought out very well, was it is labor intensive. And in my budget here, I'm going to show you how labor intensive I consider it to be. But for the most part, you're hand planting, you are removing any male plants, you're hand harvesting, you're hand weeding, just walking through that field a lot. And again, the fields that I've looked at in Kentucky, they, for the most part, were tobacco fields with H-2A labor, which is immigrant labor that came in, and they were spending a lot of work on labor. And there are beginning to be mechanical solutions. Those are not yet here, and so they're not in my budget. But again, if you have a mechanical solution, change my budget. Which, let me real quick bring my budget back up. Hemp for CBD, if I can find it. Hello. Here's my hemp for CBD budget. If I can, yeah. Again, you can change any of these numbers that are in the gray. One other thing I'm going to point out on this one, though, is if you go far to the right, it has how everything was calculated. So again, going back to Justin's thing, he said it was on a 5x6 or a 6x6 spacing for the most part. My budget has it on a 6x4 spacing. to which I would defer to Justin as to what normally should be done. So I'm going to show you here just real fun. Over here, I say I need 1,906 plants per acre. I'm going to go with Justin's recommendation of a 6x6 spacing. So I'm going to change this to 72. And all of a sudden, that 1906 changed to 1271. So the reason I bring this up is a lot of these questions that are going to be in CBD are able to be addressed over here far to the right. How much labor calculations and plant clones and things of that nature, far to the right. Having said that, let me get back to this presentation and my budget that I had, which is on a 4x6 spacing. I'm sorry, Justin, but I said you're going to get 1,500 pounds at 8% CBD, and you're going to market it at 75 cents a pound, and that's $9,000. You spend $5,700 just for the transplants. You have $100 worth of fertilizer, which is in line with everything. But now you've got $2,900 for machinery and irrigation cost, and you have 246 hours worth of labor per acre for $3,800. And then again, a question that's been brought up earlier today was, what about the monitoring and testing? And the situation is, you probably don't want to just test it once because this is such an expensive commodity. You are going to begin testing it, and maybe testing it actually weekly after the flower starts to appear, to make sure you don't get that THC too high and optimize the CBD at the same time. So I have a lot more testing that's involved there. And I'll just real quick go back. If you want to come over here to the testing sampling cost, interest on registration, crop insurance, 2.5 times at 8. I'd have to go over here to the right to see how often I test it. But anyway, over here, here's my hemp sampling and cost. Certified hemp sampler fee, my THC test for a total, and they come over there. Just to let you know, all these details can be changed, but right now I say sampling and testing is $620. Supplies that you'll need, interest of $260. Do you understand that to grow this, you're maybe paying the banker who loaned you the money $260, whereas in the previous budgets and for corn, you may be $7 or $8 for interest. So unless you have a lot of cash, plan on borrowing a lot of money. The land is still $150, the total cost are $1,400, and you lost $5,000. Last year's budget didn't have you losing $5,000, it had you making about $5,000. But last year's budget was based on a higher CBD price. That price is really tanked. I'll show you a graph about that here in a minute. So again, I have sensitivity analyses on these. So again, 8% right here at 75 cents is minus $5,000. I have to bring it up to about $1.50 before I actually am in the black, or I need to bring, well, at 75 cents, I can't make money. And if I don't, I'm sorry, if I can't get my biomass yield up high enough, I'm not going to make money. So I need to be really careful with CBD. I'm showing that it's probably not going to make you money in 2021. I could be wrong, but let me show you some of the ideas behind it. First off, it takes a lot of labor. You need a good contract, and I might mention that contracts for CBD are changing. So back in 2019, you would deliver the plant, and as soon as you delivered it, it was the processor's plant, and you got paid for it. The people that I'm talking to now indicate that you are delivering the plant to a processor who, for a toll charge, returns the crude back to you, and you have to find somebody to sell it. So they're just different contracts that are being developed right now. Do you have the appropriate drying and storage capacity? Do you have the ability to control quality? THC limit may be more challenging because THC somehow is affected. CBD and THC may be correlated. And so there's also the testing uncertainty. You're testing a lot more. You're hoping to actually know what's going on, and there is some uncertainty there. So here's the reason why I say it's tough to make money in CBD right now. If you look there, it was July of 2019, the price was over $4. In fact, from April to July, it was essentially $4 or more for a percent of CBD in a pound of biomass. By the end of the year, it was less than $1. So that was 2019, where it just shows that straight down price drop. This is, again, I got this one from Kentucky, but this is the price for a longer period of time. But you see, since December 2019, it has not come up. So the price is down low. And if you'll notice, that dark blue line is Kentucky on September 20th, or September of 2020. It was at the 50 cent mark. So unless you have a contract that is going to get you more, I'm not sure there's a reason to think that you're going to get more than that 75 cents. You might be able to, but it would require a contract. So here's the September 2020 biomass contracts. Again, if you look at the second bar in each one of those, that is the Kentucky, which would be closest to us. And Kentucky prices are a little bit less. So you might say, well, why are we looking at Kentucky? I'd rather get the price from the Northeast. Well, you're not in the Northeast, so our prices are a little bit lower, most likely, for CBD. And again, CBD, once it's processed, gives you a crude or a distillate or an isolate that just continually purifies a higher purity. And again, this is just 2019, but you see that it started out, at least the crude did, up at $6,000, ended at less than $1,000 within a year. If you come up to 2020, again, this graph or information is from Pan Exchange and the University of Kentucky. It has not increased, so it is just staying down low and difficult pricing situation for making a profit. Again, one of the big expenses on my budget is the seed or the propagule. So here's the prices. I had a $3 seed price, and or actually I had a $3 clone price. Here it says the assessed price is about $3.12. So I don't think my cost of seed or of clones is off. But you can begin to look at how much things cost. By the way, we've got highlighted down there the CBG as well, because people are looking at not just CBD, but CBG. And so there are different prices that are going on with regard to that. So from an economics perspective, as Tricia said, I tend to look at risk. And so what are the risks that are happening if you decide to grow hemp? We don't have a lot of years of experiments or yields, so we don't know what the production is going to be. We have limited seed and genetics. There is the production risk of high THC. We really don't know what the scale of operations, whether you should be growing 1 acre or 10 acres or 20 acres or 100 acres. Of course, normally in agricultural production, there is a return to scale, meaning the larger businesses can produce cheaper. I'm not quite sure that is the case with particularly CBD, but it may be the case with fiber or seed. And with these new and unproven equipment solutions, the fun part about the risk there, and at least I think it's fun, is what we might call technological obsolescence. Meaning right now, if you bought a piece of equipment that you're going to be using is there going to be a new piece of equipment 3 years down the road which makes your old piece of equipment obsolete? And I really don't know, but I found it interesting as I was listening to Justin about there's, and I should have written it down, you know, taking the flowers off either dry or wet. And so you buy a situation that takes the flowers off dry, and 2 years from now, all the contractors want you to have the flowers taken off wet and then dried down after that. And I'm not making a prediction. I'm just saying, as equipment changes and as contracts change, there is that opportunity for you getting in the wrong line at the supermarket and buying something improper. When I look at marketing and price risk, there is the counterparty risk, which what that means is all of the processors that declared bankruptcy or financial exigencies in 2019 and were not able to fulfill their contract, that caused the farmer to not be able to fulfill some of his contracts. And so it was just a ripple effect. Most people would like to get into something for more than just a year or two. And so are there long-term pricing opportunities? Are you going to have the labor availability? And again, in Kentucky, the labor was actually immigrant labor, H-2A, documented labor. But are you prepared to do that if you've not done it before because you've not been a tobacco grower? So the financial risk is the banking industry and services. Industrial hemp is a legal product, but the banks are still uncertain as to what happens if you come up with a THC that is out of compliance. Does it all of a sudden become an illegal product? And so some banks are going to be a little bit more cautious than others, and there's some risk there. Government loan guarantees actually state, hey, if you got a THC above 0.3%, then you're not eligible for these guarantees. And you go, wait, I was trying to grow it lower. Well, that kicks you out all of a sudden. So there is some institutional and legal risk of compliance, not understanding state laws because they change from state to state. And then cross-pollination. There have been, I guess, not friendly neighbor relations when a person is growing hemp for seed or fiber next to a guy who's growing hemp for CBD, and pollen will drift across, and all this, there's a fight now. So there are those types of risk. And again, as Justin pointed out well, you need to know what's going on around you, not just for herbicide drift, but also for pollen drift potential. A lot of people like crop insurance. Let me just address crop insurance real quickly here. There are 3 ways to get crop insurance. In Missouri, the only 2 ways are the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program and the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program. So if you're wanting to go for NAP, you'll just need to go to your FCS office, or your FSA office, I'm sorry, and talk with them. If you're wanting to go with Whole Farm Revenue Protection, really the key here, that I'm going to skip some of this, is that you need 3 to 5 years of a Schedule F. So if you've not been a farmer who has filed a Schedule F for 3 years, you're not going to be able to get whole farm revenue protection. And so the rest of these points are going to be in my next slide, which is not available for Missouri, but theoretically should become available in Missouri as some of these other states learn lessons. But most people like multi-peril yield protection insurance. I mean, that's what crop producers and whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, grain, sorghum, all of those guys are going for yield protection or revenue protection. You'll notice in the state map that Illinois has it, Kentucky and Tennessee, Wisconsin and Minnesota, Kansas and Oklahoma, but not Missouri. So we do not have this type of insurance yet. If we do, and this also applies to the whole farm revenue protection that I mentioned before, in order for you to insure it, you have to have at least 1 year production history. So if you grew crops in 2020, you'll be able to insure it in 2021, not in Missouri, but in Illinois or Kentucky. But But what that means is your first year is uninsured, and you've got to, that first year also is usually your experiment year where you don't normally produce as well as you hope you would in the long term. But that's going to be used as your APH or help to determine your APH. So real quick, you need 1 year production history. You have to have a state permit. You have to have a processor contract. So you don't get to grow this and say, I'm going to sell it on the market somehow, yet to be determined, and still get crop insurance. You must have a processor contract. Hopefully that processor contract is good and maintains itself. You have to grow according to the contract specs, which, by the way, for corn and soybeans on a yield protection, you have to grow according to best management practices as determined by the Extension Office. We don't really have best management practices. So right now they're saying it has to be grown according to the production contract specifications. And there are several other little things, but I would just ask your insurance agent. An insurable loss is really what's called an act of God, meaning not enough rain, too much rain, freeze, wind, insects, things of that nature. But it is not THC too big, because God just would not have THC greater than 0.3. And so that's not an insurable loss. And that was a little joke in case you didn't get it. And if you fail to follow the contract specs, or if you harvest a product that becomes infested, that also is not insurable. In other words, once you cut that product, whether it's seed, fiber, or CBD, and you store it for however long prior to delivering it to the processor, if during that period of time it becomes infected with mold, yeast, fungus, whatever problem you have, that's not going to be covered. So you need to have any mold, yeast, fungus observed in the field, because in the field it could be a protected loss, but not in storage.
May I pose hey Ray, could you go
Yes.
back to that slide, and I'd like to pose a question. What are the dates on your legend here? What are those referred to?
So those are planting dates. So
Okay.
real quick, so the blue states, which are the ones most around us, have a planting date of March 5th. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That is not that is a purchase date, not a planting date. So you have
for the crop insurance.
That's right. So you have to purchase it by March 15th in most of our surrounding states.
Okay.
And then you plant it whenever you want, but you purchase it by March 15th.
All right. That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to skip this one on the FSA, other than, like I mentioned, if you're going to go with the NAP insurance, you need to talk with your FSA. But they all say you need to report it to FSA. I'm going to skip this on permits because Alan and Aaron have been on already and talked with you about that. Let me just close by saying we have all of these publications up on the web at extension.missouri.edu. Type in the word industrial hemp and these will come up for you. So those are opportunities for you. And again, there's that URL for that. I'm going to close right there and take questions.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful and very educational. And I was trying to turn your screen sharing off, but I don't need to.
I can figure out how to do it.
Yes, you sure can. Connor was commenting, and we haven't gone into a lot of the CBG, but Connor makes the comment that it was recently in some trials proven to initiate neurogenesis in patients with degenerative brain conditions, of course, and we know what that is. That's Alzheimer's. So we should all be drinking that stuff. Has increased its value in addition to its low natural occurrence and high cost of extraction. And I know that I have heard Justin talk in the past about how the CBG product has a much higher value in the marketplace. So there's that's one part of it.
So can I jump off of that? So you're exactly right that we always talk about CBD because that was the first one on the market that people were interested in. And that's really about the only data that we have. There's a little bit of data on CBG and some of the other CB numbers, letters.
Right.
So this is a very much an evolving economic market-based activity. I still would go back to this principle. If you're going to grow it, get a contract for it. And if you're going to grow it for CBG instead of CBD, or if you're going to grow it for both CBG and CBD, make that in the contract and make sure you know what you're growing for. And once you do that, it's pretty much maintaining that contract specs is the method that you want to go for.
Well, I think and I would also like to say that I think there's a lot of opportunity here for a creative producer to diversify a little bit. And, as Connor was pointing out, what are you doing with the fiber? Well, if you were just harvesting the CBD, the flowers, couldn't you bale that fiber and use it for something else, some kind of a composting product that gardeners could use? That would be another option, because otherwise you're just, it's just going to go to waste. Certainly, we all know that it's organic matter, and it would certainly, improve any kind of soil profile. So that would be one thing I would think about. But on Friday, we're going to have one producer talk who's got kind of a vertical operation, and so you can go the traditional marketing of commodities where you just produce a commodity and you sell it to the cooperative, right, and for the specified contract price. But you can also find a way to vertically integrate your process. So you may be buying the seed, but you may be growing your own seedlings, doing your own harvesting, and then producing your CBD as specialty product.
Mm-hmm.
As value-added product, I'll put it that way. So there's a lot of different ways to, I think, there's a lot of different opportunity here. I don't know if others have other questions that they want to comment, but.
Patricia, I'll just jump in real quick. And, this kind of goes back to my vegetable background and direct marketing. And one producer I was working with, they kind of had a situation where they were in a more urban area. So there was a lot of opportunity for agritourism. It was kind of an old farm that had yet to be developed. So it all kind of fell apart because of COVID, but, they were planning on, for instance, having, visit a hemp farm day. People would come and pay, walk the fields, check it out. I mean, there's the novelty right now that's not going to be there forever, but, they were also going to have farm to table dinners and, hemp products. And I think you're right. There's a lot of ways to go with it. I think, making sure your market can bear what's going on. I mean, the other carve out is that that hemp flower, when it's sold whole, that is, from last I've seen, 10% of that market. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just like anything else. I mean, there's people that are growing it on a large scale for that output. But I think for smaller scale producers, if they think they can connect with a market on that, it's a lot more like growing a vegetable crop. And there might be more of an opportunity for direct marketing.
And I also think there's opportunity for cooperatives. In other words, just like grain cooperatives, I think there's opportunity for hemp cooperatives because there'd be economies of scale if you needed to invest in, the cleaning equipment and the processing equipment and all of that. If you were a shareholder in a cooperative, then they would market it on the open market once you join in with a contract to deliver. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's still a wide open market, even though it kind of overcame the tulip. What do we call it? The tulip market, the tulip crazed market of where it was really valuable the first year when everybody started using it. And then if only somebody had started that rumor on social media that it would cure COVID. I mean, what's up with that? Why wouldn't you think of that? You know, if you needed to, I'm just making a joke, of course. You needed to put that in the words of somebody who had a national platform. But anyway, does that do it? And thank you very much, Ray, for walking us through the budgets. I think those are very important tools for producers to use, because as you and I both say, we're all about risk management. We want you to know before you grow, and we want you to understand what you're getting into. Don't just grow it and think, well, if I grow it, they will come. You need to know what you're getting into initially. Let's see. And Lance says the key is to produce finished products, which I certainly agree with. Smokable flower, pre-rolls, tinctures, etc. I think there's opportunity out there for small producers to, again, produce a value-added product. And Connor says, Dr. Massey, glad to hear an academic. You're an academic. Echo, of course you are. Well, what I've been advocating to producers I speak to on either the medicinal or the industrial. So we know there's a lot of opportunity. I also want to say somebody like Mervyn Wallace, who runs Missouri Wildflowers, does seed cleaning all the time. So there's opportunity to kind of pick his brain a little bit and find out what it would cost to get a good seed cleaning piece of equipment. But we also heard Lincoln is investing in a lot of valuable equipment for their labs. So that's another resource that we'll certainly want to direct people to as well. Anybody else have any last comments or questions? Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Rich Selby from Tiger Fiber. So we'll go to the other side of the coin, the fiber side. We're going to jump from CBD to fiber. So that should be interesting. We're looking forward to hearing. Any last comments from anyone? Hey, thank you very, very much, Dr. Massey. Thank you, Justin. You guys did a great job. Good information. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right. So I'm going to close it for now. I will be converting the video to a YouTube and sharing it with those who are registered. So thank you very much.
All right. See ya.
Yep.
Take
Bye.
care.